Old Tom Gray here. Made me a movable pedestal for my big Wilton vise, my Pennsylvania Railroad vise, and my Armstrong pipe vise. It's made out of 2x3 tubing, 1/8 inch wall, a piece of 1/2 inch plate, a couple of wheels, and a bunch of welding. I'll show you how I did it. Okay, let's get this started. So here's my big bullet machinist vise. 6 inches, 6-inch jaws, heavy as they'll get out. Made by Wilton in Schiller Park, Illinois, not far from where I used to live. So a rule of how high to make a vise off the floor. There's an old-fashioned rule of thumb that if you're doing fine work in a vise, like filing or fine cutting, that you stand like this with your forearm level to the floor and mark that height. And that should be the top of the vise jaws. Again, that's for doing fine work. So for me, that's right there. 41 inches. This is currently sitting on my bench, which is 36 inches tall. So this is too tall. However, this rule is for fine work. For heavy work, you want the vise lower, say 4 inches lower, because you want your weight, you want to be able to get your weight on top of your work. Hammering, bending, cutting, hacksawing. You want to be able to lean over your work and get on top of it. So the vise has to go lower than this. So let's say 4 inches below that. In my case, that would be 37 inches. So just a wee bit taller than the top of this bench. So let me experiment a little bit, see how it feels. This definitely feels too high to me to be doing heavy work. Fine work, yes. But for fine work, I wouldn't use this vise. I'd use a different vise. So let me try a couple other things. And here's the big fella sitting on my industrial strength workmate, which is roughly 30 inches off the floor. So doing the elbow test, you can see it's a little bit too low for fine work. However, it's about the right height for doing heavy work. Maybe a little bit high, but I can get right with this. Besides, the anvil is at the perfect height for doing heavy work. So this will be our bench height for heavy work. Now, I have an advantage here. I also have the swivel base for this big boy, which raises it up 2 inches and puts it right at my elbow height, or just below it. So this is good for fine work. So our pedestal is going to be made with a 30-inch tall platform and 2 hole patterns, one for the swivel base and one for the fixed base. And when I'm doing fixed heavy work, I'll use the fixed one. When I'm doing light work, I'll put on the pedestal, put on the pivot base. By the way, for doing heavy work, I really do not like swivel vises. I like them bolted down solid, so this works great. Here's the top. 2 feet by 1 foot, piece of big honking 1/2 inch steel. So I'm just going to start by deburring this. Actually, the mill did a pretty nice job cleaning it up. Usually it's a lot rougher than this, but I'm just going to deburr it. And I'm going to sand all the edges just with a piece of 60 grit. Next, I'm going to lay out the hole pattern for holding the big vise here and some little vices back here. I'll show you that in a minute. So let's start with marking center. Another rule of thumb is to align the back jaw with the edge of the bench. So I'm just going to clamp this piece of hardware store reinforcement strap in here and move it to the edge. Make sure it's straight, just eyeballing it right about there. Mark that hole. That looks good. Okay. Mounting holes are 5 inches apart. So 1, 2.5. 1, 2.5. So I'm a little bit too far this way, so I'm going to back these holes up 1/8 of an inch. Just double checking my measurements here. Okay, center punching. Using my Dasco punch and the Ma Bell Persuader. This funny looking pattern is for the swivel base. So the rear holes are at 5.5 inch spacing, the front's at 7. There's always times where one vise just isn't enough. So on this end, I'm going to drill it for my Pennsylvania Railroad vise, which is a 4-inch jaw, facing that way. This is the tail stock of the Wilton right here. So they won't clash with each other. So in case I need to mount them both at the same time, I can. Got a job going in the Wilton, can haul the stand out and set up another job in Pennsylvania. There's always times when you're working on something and you need to cut some tubing. So I'm going to set up another hole pattern for my Armstrong pipe vise. I'm going to get to drilling. I'm going to drill pilot holes at 1/8 inch in all the locations and then expand them out. Everything takes 1/2 inch bolts. Okay, one down, a few more to go. Final hole. I messed up the measurements a little bit. I'm off about 1/8 of an inch that way and 1/8 of an inch that way, so I center punched a new one. Let's get her drilled and then we're done. We're done punching holes. Time for more layout work. This is a piece of cardboard. I don't know what from, but it's marked with a 2x3 rectangle. That's the blue line. That's the size of the tubing we're going to be using to make the legs. And then the white margin is allowance for the weld. So these are the holes for the wilton, for the big wilton. So for the front leg, I want to place this so that I can get the bolts with washers and socket clearance and weld clearance and clearance for gussets all at the same time. So these are the heavy work fixed base holes. These are the pivot base holes. So if I put the front leg right about there, I can get gussets out the sides. I won't interfere with the holes for the pivot base, and I won't interfere with the holes for the fixed base. Here we are at the other end. These are the holes for the Pennsylvania. So the tube, the leg is going to go in the opposite orientation, 90 degrees to the front leg, and placed just like this. So I've got room for gussets out all four sides, and I don't interfere with the bolts, and I've got socket clearance, and I've got wrench clearance. Time to do some cutting. Weapon of choice, skill saw 77. These steel cutting blades throw a lot of metal, so suit up. All right, time to size the gussets. So here's the leg. There's the leg. I want to leave 1.5 inches all the way around for clamping, in case I need to clamp something to it, have room for the clamp to bite. So that looks like the gussets can be 3 inches. All the gussets are going to be made out of 1/4 inch A36. So here's the base all dry fitted up. Gussets for it are going to be a little bit bigger. It's like 4 inches. Yeah, that looks about right. So I got a bunch of grinding to do. Got to prep all the edges, got to round all the corners, get these things ready for welding. For that, I'm going to use the angle grinder. Also have to prep all the joints on the tubes. That's also a job for the angle grinder. Now we need the foot pads. I'm going to cut those out a 1/4 inch as well. Need 3 of them. Alright, got a lot of sanding to do. So I'm going to sand all the gussets, the foot pads, everything, just using my Porter cable speed block and a 40 grit aluminum oxide. Everything is nice and sanded and smooth. Extreme close-up on the end of the spreader. There's the foot pad. There's the spreader. And I want to mount wheels on it so that I can tilt it up and move it about the shop easily. So I'm going to make, here's the wheels I'm going to use. 4-inch with a roller bearing. Heavy duty. So what I need to do is get the axle center behind the furthest point back on the foot pad so that when I tilt it, everything goes up. It lifts it off the floor. So I made a cardboard template. Looks like this. Covers the end of the tube, end of the spreader tube. Provides an axle mount, which I'm simulating with the chopstick. And then when this is lifted by pulling forward or back, pulling on the vise toward, when I'm standing behind it, pulling on the vise, this pivots up. So this point coincides with that point. And as you can see, everything lifts. So it ought to work. So now I'm going to cut 2 of these out of this piece of 1/4 inch offcut. That's the axle bolt. So in close-up here, you can see the wheel mounted on the bracket just barely touches the surface. So as soon as the pedestal is rocked backwards, you can see the corner lifts off and she's free to roll. Before going any further, I'm going to drill some vent holes in the bottoms of these tubes and where the tubes are going to be welded together to ventilate moisture. Forgot the ground. I went and drilled the vent hole on the other side and then welded it backwards, so I just patched that with a weld and drilled a new vent hole. There we are, all tacked together. So tomorrow I'll continue on, and it's going to be finish welding and adding all the gussets. So not the best welding I've ever done, but not too bad. So to place the gussets, I simply take my speed square and just scribe or mark a line down the center of each tube with a Sharpie, and then just hold her right there and tack her in. There she is, all welded up and grounded up and ready for paint. I'm going to paint the base, but I'm going to leave the top mill finish. That's going to be that surface is going to have a rough life, so ready for paint. So I'm going to do the bottom first, then stand it up and do the parts you can see. Using my new favorite color, Krylon Fusion Red Pepper. Let's get to it. When you're painting like this, just fog it on easy. Don't lay it on in heavy coats. Just light, distant fogging. If you lay on in heavy coats, it's just going to get runs in it. So just go easy, take your time. So in between coats, or when you're storing the can, all you got to do is just take a rag and just wipe off the nozzle, wipe off the edge of the nozzle. I've done all kinds of stuff over the years, blow them out, soak them in thinner. But this works. This is all you need. I've left them stored for weeks and months after just doing this. Like this can has been sitting for weeks. And it worked fine. Start with an axle bolt and a washer. some AN washers under the heads for on the vise. And there it is, all assembled. Got the big Wilton on it, got the Pennsylvania Railroad on it, and this thing is hell for stout. So I can put all my weight on it, and it does not budge. It's no rocking, no tipping. That's all my weight right there. It doesn't move. So to steer it around the shop, I just grabbed this piece of unistrut to use as a handlebar. Could use anything. Piece of tubing, piece of angle iron. Just clamp it in the big Wilton. Toe on the front. Rock it back onto the wheels. And steer it around the shop. Where you get it where you want it. Toe back down. Ease it back into place. Now I put rubber under the foot pads because my shop floor is really soft concrete, and anything dents it. It's almost like drywall. So I didn't want to, I'm going to be wailing on this thing. I don't want to damage the floor any more than I have to. So I'm going to call it good here on this one. And it's on to the next project. I'll see you there and then.